Hi, this is Larry Halstead, and I'm sitting here today in the conference room at World Life Research Institute in Grand Terrace. And I have the privilege of being here today with my good friend Chuck Millet. Chuck Millet is the founder of Professional Botanicals. And Chuck, you've been around this table before, have you not?
I have spent so much time around this table, Larry, that this brings back so many memories. In fact, when I walked in, I got a little emotion about it.
I do understand that, and it's
a lot
emotional
of
for me
memories.
too because we're talking 8 years since my father passed, Dr. Bruce Halstead. And Chuck, what I'd like is if you could just kind of give us a little background into what led up to you meeting my father, and then if you could just kind of tell us a little bit about how you went to form your company and how all that happened. I know the story, but we'd like to get it documented here. So start wherever you feel good.
I'd love to. I don't know how much detail you want, Larry, but I was a business consultant for about 18 years, and a friend of mine who was involved in a family nutrition company wanted to market products to doctors. And so, as a consultant, I signed a contract with them to help them set up a program to market their products to doctors. They were only selling to lay people and to health food stores at the time. And about 2 years into the contract, we were doing quite well. And it was during that 2 year period that I came in contact with Dr. Bruce Halstead.
Now you met him at a convention, is that right?
I did, and I don't recall which particular convention it was because I was attending so many conventions.
Right. We've
at
all been to
that
too many
time.
conventions.
Whether it was an NIH convention or what, I don't remember. I know it was here in California, and I remember meeting him. And of course, we were at that time recruiting and setting up the marketing for the company that I was consulting for at that time. And the the actual real and get to know Dr. Halstead occurred when we set up a seminar for doctors in Acapulco, Mexico.
Well, let me stop you right there. If we roll back to this convention that you actually met him, do you remember who introduced you or how that introduction came about?
Well, I'm not sure, and I just looked at a picture just a few minutes ago of Mark Blumenthal, and it may even have been Mark that introduced me to Bruce.
Okay.
But he was introduced to me as an MD who was into orthomolecular medicine and someone that could certainly be an asset to us as a customer or in some way, and that was the introduction.
Okay.
But what happened, we set up a seminar, I set up a seminar for this company that I was consulting with in Acapulco, Mexico. And we invited doctors from all over the United States to come to that seminar, and we had quite a few that had been scheduled to attend. And maybe a month or so before that, the family that owned the company I was consulting for got in a big argument, and it became a feud to end all feuds. And I could see that the company was going to fall apart. And primarily it was a matter of the father who owned most of the company. The sons who were minority shareholders, owned just a small part of the company. And so you knew who was going to win out. And I actually went to all of them and I said, look, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to be in the middle. Therefore, I'd like you to set my contract aside and allow me to do whatever I'd like to do. In fact, I probably will start my own company, and they were agreeable to that. And so we'd set up this seminar in Acapulco, Mexico, and interestingly enough, the keynote speaker at that seminar for the doctors was Dr. Bruce Halstead, your father. And we had a good turnout. I even was prepared at the time we went to Acapulco. I carried a contract in my pocket making an offer to this other company to buy them out. And that was my intention. In fact, I carried a sizable cashier's check with me in my vest pocket all ready to make a down payment and to finish the transaction right
You actually
then
got
and there.
that close.
We were that close. And the seminar, about the second day of the seminar, Bruce and I were really enjoying ourselves. We did several scuba dives there in the bays at Acapulco. I remember that Dr. Halstead, who grew up with scuba gear, and Jacques Cousteau, long before they had any kind of certification for divers.
This was before they had dive tables.
They didn't even know about it.
And it was also before anyone knew who Jacques Cousteau was.
Exactly. And so Bruce didn't have a certification card to get a tank that was full of air. And so it's a little hard to dive without air. And so I would have to keep going back and getting extra tanks because I'd simply, of course, give one to Bruce Halstead so he'd have a tank. And I remember it was so hot down there. It was so hot down there in Acapulco that the water temperature was like in the mid-80s. And the water was warm. The temperature was like in the 90s.
You almost sweat when you're in the water, huh?
Oh, it was really bad. And so I didn't wear any kind of a dive suit. And Bruce showed up in this black, I mean, cooking, black in the hot sun really gets you hot. But Bruce showed up in this black suit. He put it on to dive, and I thought, gee, you're going to be awful warm. He said, I never dive unless I wear a suit. And the reason I don't is because there are so many things that you can touch or that will bite you in the ocean that you never want to be caught down there without some protection. And that's something I never forgot. I did a lot of dives after that, and always with Bruce, I remember he wore a suit. Even though it was so hot you could hardly stand to put it on. But we really enjoyed ourselves for several days. But one evening we went to dinner. And of course I'd confided in Bruce about my idea of buying this company out. And we were sitting across the table from each other, and my good wife was there with us. And Bruce said, Chuck, he says, I think there's a better way to do this. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, instead of buying this company, my personal recommendation to you is to start your own. He says, don't buy this company with all the problems that come with it, all the luggage, the baggage. He said, start your own company. And he said, if you will do that, when we get back from Acapulco, he says, you call me a week later and I'll have everything lined up for you. You just be prepared to get on the airplane because I'm going to fly you all over the country and I'm going to introduce you to everybody who is cutting edge in research on herbs and their use with nutrition. And I looked at him and I said, Bruce, you got a deal. So we flew back from Acapulco, and like the following Monday after I was back, I called Bruce, and he and I got together, and he had lined out a schedule for me, and the first place he sent me was to University of Illinois, Dr. Norman Farnsworth. He had me contact and get together with Rick Marin. In fact, I think Rick Marin met me here at this facility right here, Ricky Marin. And Ricky's comments were, I do research for all of the drug companies. And he says, I travel in the Amazon, I travel all over South America, Central America, looking for specimens and samples and making friends with the Indian medicine men. And he says, my files are open to you. Whatever you want, you can have. And I was very impressed with Rick.
Now let me just clarify. With Ricky Marin, this was an individual that my father knew his father, and Ricky became a raw natural product procurement guy. And how he would do this is go down to South America and sit down with the witch doctor, the whatever other name you might want to use for him, and ask him, well, what do you use for these different ailments? And then they would collect samples of that, and that's really what the basis of that research was. And this is something that Ricky did throughout the history of World Life Research Institute, and now Ricky continues this on under the name of his own nonprofit called Life Research International. Go ahead.
I also through Dr. Halstead, he introduced me to Richard Scharfenberg. And Richard Scharfenberg, his story was that he grew up in China. His parents were Seventh-day Adventist missionaries in China, and he grew up in his father's library where there was 8,000 books, according to Richard, and he had nothing to do but read books. And he developed as a young man, a love affair with books. And he could give Richard Scharfenberg a title, a subject, anything you wanted to, and he would come back with stacks and stacks and stacks of documentation. What an impressive man he was.
Yeah, I would add on Dick Scharfenberg that anytime my father set out to write a new book or start some research on any project, doesn't matter what the subject is, it would always start with a phone call to Dick Scharfenberg and send Dick. And Dick knew every library in Southern California and many libraries outside of Southern California like the back of his hand. So
He did. In fact, I remember one vacation he took, and I asked him, I says, Dick, how was your vacation? He was gone for 2 weeks, and he says, he says, I really enjoyed it. He says, I went up into the Northwest and met with my daughter, but he says the best thing was that I went to some book sales. I went to some libraries that were selling their books, and he says, I made some good buys. So even on vacation, Scharfenberg would do nothing but look at books. What a man. I could go on and on. Dr. Halstead tied me in with several different companies that were doing herbs and their relationship with cancer treatments. And we were able to go through some of their files and glean information. I remember one incident he came up with. He contacted me and he said, Chuck, I've got a list of the 200 most important medicinal plants in the entire world. He says, this is a result of $1 million study done by the World Health Organization. He said, the results of this is a list of 200 plants that are the most important for health in the world. And he says, would you like a copy? And I says, can you get me some? He says, it's not public, but I'll get you a copy. And so I flew down here to this facility and picked that up, and we went over it together. Bruce Halstead put together for me a team. In essence, I contributed, yes, I brought in some other people that I knew, nutritionists, herbalists, who'd had 30 and 20 years experience in that field. But Bruce put together with me a team, and we would sit around my dining room table, which expanded was about the size of this table we're sitting at, and we would all compare notes on the research data that we'd been able to gather. And it was as a result of that that Professional Botanicals, a line that we put together, formulas for doctors, that we put together over 100 herb formulas for doctors. And if an ingredient cost a little more, if it made the product better, we put it in anyway, because we weren't concerned about competing on a retail basis with other companies. We knew that we would be selling to doctors only, and so that was the kind of product we wanted. Products maybe that cost a little more, but we knew that they would be effective, that they would work. And I owe the legacy of Professional Botanicals to Dr. Halstead, because without him, I don't know what we would have ended up with. But after 30 years, this is when we started in 1980, Dr. Halstead to me became a good friend. He came to my home many times in Utah. We spent many different times at conventions. He came to seminars with me and instructed my people many times. We sit at this very table time and time again, going over formulas, looking at research. I remember one occasion, this was when the Chernobyl incident, when the atomic power plant melted down and had contaminated the entire city. I mean, thousands and thousands were dead or dying, and the Russians had communicated with Bruce and asked for his help and input on what to do to help those people, because they knew of his experience back in World War II when he was actually involved in the same type of thing with the Japanese. And so Bruce had some history with all of these countries, with the Chinese, with the Russians, and he would tell me story after story after story, many of them right here or sitting at his desk in the other room. And oh, what a heritage.
Did he ever tell you about the time he was in USSR and they arrested him and threw him in the gulag?
No, he never told me he went to jail. He told me about being in the USSR. In fact, I know that he spent time at the hospital in Vladivostok.
Right.
And,
Vladivostok being
did
the
some
closed
studies there.
scientific community of back then the USSR.
Yes, because we were not friends with the Russians at that time. In
No.
fact, I believe that he was like the only MD ever allowed to go there.
Yeah, in Vladivostok, President Nixon had requested to visit there on one of his trips to USSR, and he was refused, and it was right then that my father was allowed. It was the first American ever into Vladivostok. But now a lot of these formulas were based also on Chinese traditional medicine as well, right?
Yes, they were.
Because we got various institutes in China that he was deeply involved with, and so it was really a marriage between Western scientific medicine and old-fashioned Chinese traditional medicine.
You know, and that's true. I remember sitting on the shelf right over here was a copy of the Pensao.
The Pensao Kong Mu, famous encyclopedia of medicinal herbs of China that dates way back, and that the copy is actually an original because it was all hand done. The color illustrations on one side of the plant and then talking about it on the other. It's well, there's a whole lot we could say about that, but it's
But Dr. Halstead introduced me to the Chinese. In fact, the head of what is the equivalent of the FDA in Taiwan. And it was through them and their help, the Chinese, who Bruce introduced me to, Dr. Xu, that we obtained several of the formulas that we put into Professional Botanicals line. And we could trace back, and they showed me this, that we could trace back in the Pensao several of those formulas. They were actually in there. And so what that meant is we were using a formula that was actually in use over 2,000 years, which had to be impressive. I mean, if it didn't work 2,000 years ago, why would we be using it now?
But the difference is that the Chinese approach it mostly through anecdotal evidence of what works. And for some reason here in the United States, in Western scientific matters, anecdotal is considered a taboo. It's like, if it works, that isn't important. What's important is what's the science behind it. And so what you had with World Life Research Institute, my father, marrying up to the Chinese traditional herbs, is thousands of years of history of what worked and what didn't. And now we measure the actual scientific properties of these different plants and whatnot, and compare that to, here's the science, well, here's the tradition, and look which part of it is identical. And for the most part, these things matched up like a hand in a glove.
And I think it's worthy to say that the Chinese philosophy was much the same as we would purport today in using natural products, in that you stimulate or support the body to actually take control of a disease process or of a problem, overcome it, and you continue that support until the body's able to handle it itself. And that philosophy is something that we really don't find in Western medicine. But that was a philosophy that I bought into very early, and using formulations where we're able to bring all of these different factors to play together in one product to support an end result was something that actually came out of the committee where Bruce Halstead helped me in putting those products together.
Now, Chuck, you understand because, for 30 years you're talking about a serious portion of that history where in this country we've had natural, holistic, alternative medicine, whatever you want to call it, on one side, and then conventional on the other side. And, that's a battle, and we've been battling. I know you've had experience with the FDA. I know that I have, fighting the FDA on all this, and you're fighting also the AMA because they're trying to create a monopolistic situation. The interesting thing about my father, and I'm sure you found this as well, is that he didn't see those lines of division. Yeah, he used to do expert testifying for doctors that ended up in legal problems on giving chelation or hyperbaric or any of these other modalities.
In fact, I've been in court with Dr. Halstead several times, not as a participant, but simply as an observer, seeing him do just what.
And this was brilliant if you did witness this, yeah. Because they would have the government's witnesses, all of these scientists, and they would always be these same witnesses my father would be up against. And they'd come in with their carts carrying, boxes of file cabinets with all of their data and information. And my father would walk in with basically nothing because it was all up here, So he would just be sitting there buying his time and waiting, and you'd have like hours and hours of these scientists and doctor types that were on the government side sitting here trying to explain very difficult scientific things to the jury, whereas my father would simply wait and buy his time and just sit in there listen like, yeah, I've heard all this before. And then when it was his time to go up on the stand, he'd just lay it out in very, no uncertain terms.
Simply.
But in a way that the jury could understand. The most common lay public amongst the jury could understand exactly what he was talking about. And that would be what would win the day.
That's exactly right.
And it was really something to watch that. If you ever got the privilege to watch that in action,
I did several times. He would invite me. Your father would invite me to be there, yeah, to simply observe the proceedings, and it was an education.
It really was.
There was no question about it. But I have been here at World Life so many times. I remember many times staying here on the grounds, in your home with your dad and having dinner, like a family.
Yeah.
It was really
when it was supper time, it was supper time, and if you were here, you had to go up and have a baked potato and a couple of vegetables, right?
And if you could get up as early as Bruce could, you
That's
could
right.
swim with him every
Yeah.
morning in the pool, and the
feed
pool
the
was
animals.
still here. You could feed the animals.
Now, we're talking roughly 1979 that you might have met him.
1980. Well, I met him, about 1979.
Because you started your company in 1980.
Right. Started the company in 1980, and I knew him before then.
And then by about 1981, which is when I started Loma Linda Health Products,
yeah,
and I started that because we were trying to work on producing some of the products that my father was working on. And the one that we were working on with Loma Linda Health Products was a product that was based on Laetrile. Laetrile having two main components, one of them being benzaldehyde, which there's a medicinal benzaldehyde and a flavoring agent, which is the flavor of almond. It's used in the bakery industry. And so we were trying to develop take benzaldehyde, which is a liquid acidic compound, and put it into an enteric-coated tablet where it would pass through your stomach into your lower intestine. And that was something that we labored on for several years, and then about 1982 or 83, you ended up carrying that product, at least for a period of time.
Yes, we did.
And that's when I came out to Utah and met with you out there and saw your operation. And this would have been in the early 80s when you were just getting going, and let me say it was very impressive back then. And now,
Exactly.
how many products are in the Professional Botanical line now?
We had over 100 products,
Okay.
and the company is still ongoing. I retired early in 2006.
And I wanted to
Okay.
get into that because we're privileged to also have your son, and we're gonna do a quick interview with him coming up next, Dr. Alan Millet. And you were ready to retire. You had worked this business hard for 30 years. You built it up from scratch. You have heavy scientific validation along with thousands of years of traditional Chinese herbal medicine backing up your products. They're very sound, very high quality. And it's not just formulating, you got to make sure you're getting good quality raw ingredients, whatever the product is you're talking about. And you've done that very successfully.
And many people don't understand the nomenclature of a plant. You get a total variation of chemical constituents in various parts of the plant, and the concentration of those varies dramatically. And so not only do you have to concern yourself with the plant itself and where it grew and how mature it was at the time it was harvested. It's got to be harvested when that particular chemical constituent is where you want it. You've got to use the part of the plant, in fact, and concern yourself with that, or you end up with something that's totally ineffective. I know many times that in my business consulting with other nutritional companies, I've seen them. Well, we're out of that dark green material, and so we're going to use another dark green material because herbs are usually green, a lot of them, even in a dried state, and they would simply substitute one for another. Well, that's the kind of thing that just tore me up. I couldn't understand why anyone would justify
Like
doing
Siberian
something like
ginseng,
that.
for example, has to be
Yeah,
grown in a certain latitude. But even if you have the plant being grown in the right um, location, you still have the fact that we're in a situation where we're battling types of agriculture. So was that herb raised with petrochemical fertilizers? Were there petrochemical pesticides that were used on it, et cetera? Or were those plants grown organically? And then if they were grown organically, there's a whole nother field of science that's developing these days about how do we infuse that plant as it's growing with super nutrients, just as that plant becomes a super nutrient for a human. How do we put the super nutrients into that plant while it's growing so that then we can pass that on to the human body?
there's
So there's a lot to it, but what we were getting to is the fact that 30 years of you doing this and doing it right and really doing a prototype of how a company could be the end product of what World Life Research was founded on in 1958 was, going out and discovering these compounds, finding out which ones had medicinal properties, and then how best to apply those medicinal properties to actually try and do something like cure cancer or deal with AIDS or whatever it is that even if it's the common cold, it's one thing to find a plant that has medicinal activity, but what activity? And how does that translate into a product that you can place in the hands of a doctor and have confidence that it has the kind of bioactivity and whatnot that's really going to get the results? Because that's how you approached your company from the very beginning. Is it's about the results that someone gets from being on the product and not about label painting and all the hype that the health food industry is how many billions of dollars these days, 50 billion,
yeah.
100 billion, something ridiculous. And there's a lot of
You know,
shady work out there.
I'll tell you something that actually Bruce and I talked about quite a bit. Was we decided that when we did a new product, instead of just putting it out on the marketplace and seeing if it worked, we would do a pilot run, just a small batch of a product. We'd do a couple of hundred bottles, and then we would send those to clinics all over the United States with the understanding this is supplied to you free to use on your patients, and these are the kinds of things that we think it will be helpful or effective for. But we require that you give us a sheet that tells us their age, their sex, their what particular problem you're addressing, what other supplements or nutrients are you supplying them, and what kind of results do you get. And you know, we kind of set a benchmark on products of around 80%, and we figured that, okay, if we can't put a product together and have it effective in 80% or more of the cases that we get feedback on, we got to go back and redesign.
Reformulate.
And that's a pretty high benchmark. But you know, it was interesting. Sometimes we would do a product and we would get back 98, 99% effective. Wow.
Yeah.
We were impressed.
And you know, this is interesting because it brings up another point, and that is that when you're talking natural health products, most of these things are actually fairly compatible and they work to enhance the immune system and all the rest of it. Many of our drugs today, especially chemotherapy agents, are poisons. They're meant to kill cells, kill cancer cells, kill whatever is not right going on in the body, and hope the rest of the body can then recover from it. And that's really, in essence, what the chemotherapy is. Chemotherapy and radiation is, attack the cancer as if you're trying to kill it, and hope that the body can survive all of the poison and radiation that you feed it. That the human can live beyond the cancer, and whereas it's totally opposite. And yet, the point I'm trying to make is that doctors who prescribe medicines, really, most doctors, they get like one class in pharmacology, and they really don't understand, because when they get classes in pharmacology, they're being trained on how to take products from Libby and Squibb and all these big companies and, move them into the marketplace. Got to move them products. And they don't understand, though, really how those products work. What they're learning is, if you have a cold or flu, this is the product. That's what a drug class teaches a doctor. This is the product to treat that. This is what we're using to treat these. What they're not understanding is, how is that actually happening within the human body? Most doctors have no clue what the mechanisms are, how it breaks down on a molecular level, on a cellular level, whatnot, as to how those products are actually working. And so with natural products, you can have a little bit more liberty, because natural products tend to work in harmony with each other in an adjunctive kind of way. Whereas, and this was something my father used to talk about a lot, was that medicines, prescription drugs, they have all of these, it's like a battle going on between the drugs. This one's raising your blood pressure because it's also doing this. So now you need another drug that's going to lower the blood pressure. So one of them's, it's just a side effect that it raises your blood pressure, but this one here to lower it. And you got like a war going on inside your body with all these drugs. And that's the beauty of natural health and natural medicine, is that you're not dealing with that. And your type of company is talking about, harmonizing them even within the natural products, which already work in conjunction with each other.
Exactly.
But how do we enhance that so that we add more enzymes to help break down and facilitate it? We have adaptogenic compounds that we add just so that whatever this compound is, it helps facilitate and adapt it. And
that's one thing that Dr. Halstead introduced me to, was what are adaptogenic compounds, and the concept and idea and the actual idea of putting something, an herb. I didn't know. I had no idea what an adaptogenic compound was, but I learned that through your father, and he educated me very well on that, and to a point now where we actually, my son has continued this since he's taken the company, but we add adaptogenic compounds to every formula, simply because it adds or enhances what you're trying to do.
when we talk about adaptogenic medicine as a whole, really what we're saying is that you take this compound, and if you have high blood pressure, it's going to lower it. But if you have low blood pressure, it'll raise it. So we're talking about normalizing agents that bring, if you're off to the left, if you're off to the right, whatever it is, it's going to bring you back to center. And that's really what adaptogens are about.
And I think, just to add to that, your father would always say this, yes, and remember, that's true even down to the cell level, the RNA, DNA balance in that cell, even to that small or minute of effect.
Right. Okay, now, so getting back 30 years of working this business and doing an outstanding job and building a company that you can be proud of and that doctors can feel very confident in any of your products, et cetera, et cetera. We can go on all day praising your company, but
That's a good
we're really
idea.
actually, there's an idea, and we're really not trying to do a promotional for Professional Botanical. We're just trying to document some history here. But you did this for 30 years after you already had a life in business. And so, you're getting up there to the point where you want to, travel and do some other projects. And you've been doing some missionary work and whatnot. So you were thinking about going fishing. So you thought scuba diving.
Yeah.
So you decided that you were going to sell your company. Is that right?
Yes.
And you were going to retire.
Yep. Exactly.
How'd that work out for you?
Well, we were in the middle of really an counter-offer situation.
Back where you were 30 years ago, except this time it's your company and you're the seller, not the buyer.
Exactly. And so I didn't feel, both of my sons are chiropractors and my daughter married a chiropractor. So all of them could have had an interest in the business. But I didn't really feel, and I talked to all of them and tried to see if they had an interest in taking over the company, and none of them really expressed an interest. And then I'm not sure. I think my son Alan, who you're going to meet now, Alan was really at a point. He'd been a chiropractor for some 20 plus years, and he was at a point where everything he owned was paid for, and life was great. And he says, he
was ready to retire.
I'm kind of ready to retire myself, And really, this was a conversation we had. And I said, I don't blame you. I mean, enjoy life. He says, yeah. He says, I want to go fishing in Alaska. And I wanted to, and we'd spent time fishing in Alaska together before. And so I felt, well, he's not interested. So here I am negotiating the sale of the company. And then I don't know what turned my son on, but he said, Dad, I need to talk to you. And we sit down and we talked about it with our wives. And he said, we've decided that maybe we ought to do something with Professional Botanicals and take you out of it. And I said, nothing would make me happier.
But you're really not out of it, are you?
Well, no, because here I am with my son here in
and we'll get into what your son's
traveling.
done with it when we talk to him, because he's taking it a whole new direction.
Yeah.
And you're staying involved and participating and help guide that ship. But, again, we're sitting here at World Life Research Institute, and, I've spent so many thousands of hours around this table, I couldn't even tell you, and you're not far behind me on the amount of time here. But we're running out the clock because one way or another, World Life is going to be relocated, and I'm personally on a mission to keep World Life together, keep its assets together, and try to move it into the new millennium. And this is a big job. This is bigger than even starting a company, because this is a big machine. We're talking, it really is the work that spans my father's entire life. He had at Golden Gate Academy of Sciences, where he started when he was in elementary school, all the way through coming down to Loma Linda and being the co-founder after he graduated from Loma Linda class of medicine class of 48. Started the School of Tropical and Preventive Medicine at Loma Linda. He was one of the founders of that. And that was a 10-year period that really laid the foundation for world life. But the discovering new compounds, herbal compounds, drugs from the sea, drugs from the Amazons and other jungles, Chinese traditional herbs, all of that was my father's life passion, in essence.
And you know, all of the information, the data that's accumulated here, the sum total of this could never be replaced, and its continuance. I spoke many times with your father about who was going to take over world life when he no longer was capable.
And did you get anywhere with him? Because I know I never did.
No. He says, well, we've thought about that, and that's about all he'd say.
Yeah, that's about all that we got out of him, because it's something about dealing with your own mortality. It's a common thread, and you see it with a lot of people, and my father had it, where you just, no matter how hard you get it, it's like, I know there's going to be a fight here, Bruce, it's like, can you help us? Can you work with us? But anyway, any other comments you want to add while we're, before we close this out?
I think that it makes me feel good to know that you at least are taking the responsibility of trying to keep this as an entity and continuing with the legacy that's here, because it's a heritage that could never be replaced.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but more than just preserving history, which is valuable in itself, but can you see a role for this organization in the future in terms of exactly what they did for you, or in fighting environmental issues, etc.? And maybe you got a comment about that.
Well, absolutely, and we both know that this facility, World Life, was a reference point for the UN,
United Nations, and the World Health Organization.
The World Health Organization, and
it flew both flags of the two organizations in an official capacity as an official reference center for the United Nations and the World Health Organization.
So as a source, as a means of providing information,
clearinghouse
to anybody in this kind of field. In fact, mankind needs to pay more attention to their health, obviously, and there's a lot of data here that would be very useful.
So if there was some deep pockets out there that could really see the value, you would highly recommend to this individual that they spend lots of money in helping secure World Life's future? Is that
absolutely, okay? Larry? I agree with you on that.
Chuck, it's been a delight. I am so glad that you were able to come and visit here one more time before World Life moves, and I just appreciate the friendship you had with my father. It's been great knowing you all these years, and I'm so glad that you got back in touch with me and that we were able to unite here one more time. And the next time you and I get together, I'm hoping it's going to be at a really great new location for World Life, and we're going to be talking about all that. And
anything we can do to help you, Larry, we want to do. We want to be there and be a part of it. So.
Well, thank you, Chuck, and really thank you for coming down here, and thank you for your comments today.
You bet. Thank
you,
Larry.
Thank you.
You've been a good host.